Good evening and welcome. My name is Dr. Patty Fagan and I'm head of school at Stewart Country Day School of the Sacred Heart in Princeton, New Jersey. We're an early childhood through grade 12 all-girls school in Princeton. We're part of a network of more than 150 Sacred Heart schools across 44 countries. We are centered with a shared commitment to form future leaders. We're also stewards of a Sacred Heart 200-year-old commitment to transforming society through the direct education of girls. Since Stewart's foundation in 1963, we have been delivering on our mission to educate girls for lives of exceptional leadership. As one of the many independent schools that have been able to offer both in-person and remote learning during this past year, we are so excited to host this evening's Common Ground speaker. The pandemic has forced us to embrace the screen as never before. The reality is that even schools who could offer a safe in-person educational experience still had students that were uncomfortable or unable to attend school in person. That tension has meant that even those schools that could offer in-person learning have had to provide some sort of distance learning as well. One way or the other, technology has played a pivotal role in supporting traditional teaching in the 2020-2021 school year. Never before have we as educators and parents understood so clearly the power of both remote and face-to-face classroom experiences. Technology has provided us a way to deliver academics, but has significantly challenged our ability to support our students' social and emotional well-being. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, Princeton Common Ground is a volunteer-led consortium of parent associations of 16 area independent schools. Working collaboratively, the group hosts several innovative speakers each year intended to inspire, invigorate, and inform. I am sure that tonight's speaker will spark conversations about our collective experience over this past year. Thank you to Princeton Common Ground co-chairs Vandana Banot and Elisa Liang for their efforts to make this event possible. And a special thank you to our Stewart parents and our reps, Lisa Pisana and Aurora Kalanico. We also want to, of course, thank our area Princeton Common Ground school reps as well. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Marissa Moyo, head of Stewart Country Day School's Upper School, who will be introducing our speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Fagan. Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Marissa Moyo, and I'm the head of Upper School here at Stewart Country Day School of the Sacred Heart. I would like to welcome you to this evening's Princeton Common Ground lecture, Parenting Past the Pandemic with Anya Kamenetz. Before we begin, please note that this evening's program will be recorded. In addition, there are multiple ways to get involved this evening. First, please note that our YouTube chat is enabled if you're signed into your Google account. If you do not see the chat feature, you can also email your questions to our team at pcgtickets@gmail.com. I would now like to briefly introduce Anya. Anya Kamenetz is an expert on learning and technology and an educational futurist with a passion for the complexities of how we learn, work, and live in the new millennium. Anya is an award-winning correspondent at National Public Radio, coordinating national coverage of education, both online and on air. Her debut book, Generation Debt, received critical acclaim for stoking debate on the unprecedented economic challenges young people face. In 2010, she published DIY-U, prompting the Huffington Post to name her an educational game changer. Critics called her third book, The Test, a must-read for anyone interested in our education system. It explored the past, present, and future of assessment and challenged conventional ideas about intelligence, achievement, and success. Her book, The Art of Screen Time, transforms the way you think about digital natives and parenting in the digital age. She's currently working on The Stolen Year, a book about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on children. Please join me in welcoming Anya Kamenetz. Anya, I'll now turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moyo. It has been such a pleasure to work with this community for the presentation I gave yesterday with faculty and tonight with parents. You all are so lucky to have such a vibrant community that's working so hard to make sure that people stay connected. And, I just hope that you realize that. And my goal with tonight's presentation is to make it as interactive as possible. I want to give you a framework for thinking about the next few months that I hope will be helpful, that comes from my research into the social and emotional aspects of this incredible experience that we've all been going through. You are invited to ask questions. There's going to be questions put in the chat, and they'll alert me. You can ask them anytime, and I'll get to them in the Q&A as well. And I'm going to start with a simple grounding exercise. And this is a model that I hope that, I'm starting to use more with my kids, and that I'm seeing people use more in their classrooms. This is an anti-anxiety exercise, and also will help us kind of focus and settle in. So if you'll kind of take a comfortable seat with me, take a few deep breaths. And I want you to kind of open your field of vision softly and notice 5 things around you that you could see. It could be an object that's on your desk, or something in the frame of the computer, or, perhaps another face that's visible to you. 5 things that you can see. And now I want you to think about a little bit internally. Notice 4 things that you can touch. So these are contact points that you're having, perhaps with your chair, with the floor. Maybe it's your clothing or your hair. 4 different things that are touching you right now, that are activating your sense of touch. And I want you to think about listening for 3 different things that you can hear around you right now. I'm hearing a faint bird song from outside, which is very nice. Now take a breath again and notice if there's 2 distinct things that you can smell. And then just inside your mouth, if there's anything that you can taste that's lingering inside your mouth right now. So that's our 5 senses. So, well, it's been a year, and my preoccupation has been what's happened with students this year. And it's undeniable that children have been going through it emotionally, educationally, physically. That's a piece of art that was done by a high school student pretty early on in the pandemic. And when I talked to her, she kind of had her whole room filled with artwork she'd made about this intense time. But I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that parents have really been going through it. This has been a really disproportionate impact on parents, and especially on mothers. So we have seen that this is actually the first recession in American history where women have lost the bulk of the jobs. And part of that has to do with the fact that it's a service-based economy, a service-based recession. And so women have lost jobs in restaurants and spas and that type of thing. But the other really big part, the big job drop in the workforce participation we saw was in the fall, when school didn't come back in session. So we saw women downshifting, stepping back in their careers. And then at home, doubling, tripling their responsibilities. Women report they're doing more of the homeschooling and more of the caregiving and more housework than before. Men are picking up more slack, but they're not doing their fair share. Women also, it's a longstanding kind of cultural norm in this society that women make healthcare decisions for their families. We're the ones that have the vaccination, the immunization records, and the scheduling. And, we worry about the bug bites and the sunscreen and all of it. And so with this pandemic, which is a public health emergency, the women are taking on this decision fatigue of deciding what is safe, what are the norms. And I'm speaking, of course, very broadly generalization here. And I'm talking about heterosexual women and in a gender normative kind of environment. But we're seeing that mothers are taking on the bulk of that kind of responsibility. And with it comes that anxiety of that responsibility, right? Am I doing the right thing for my family? Am I balancing everyone's needs and just doubling and tripling? And the toll that it's taken has just been seen in so many kinds of externalizing and internalizing behaviors for women. So we've seen increased reports of drinking, marijuana use, liver disease in young women, very strange kind of development there. Lots of parents reporting weight gain, even more over and above general COVID weight gain. And obviously, mental health, anxiety, depression, and run of the mill stress is happening for parents. So, just taking a minute to acknowledge that it's been a very particular experience for parents. And now we have this strange opportunity, which is potentially, we have cases dropping. I think the headline this morning in the New York Times was one of the most hopeful moments in the whole course of the pandemic. So 15 months, finally, we see good news. And that's a tough one too. A lot of times it's really when we are past something or past the immediate danger, you might be running on adrenaline and going on energy. And then at some point you hit that wall. And I don't know if you were like me, you've hit that wall several times. And so now really is the moment to check in and say, where am I on this curve? Right. So some of us are really struggling. Some of us have gone deep into our coping mechanisms that may not be so healthy, or we just have been overwhelmed above our heads and we're hitting that wall right now and we're struggling. Um, some of us, I want to take a moment to recognize, are really thriving. The days got longer and it got warmer and you got vaccinated and you saw your parents for the first time. They hugged their grandkids for the first time. And it's just been so grateful for every day. And that's a wonderful thing to acknowledge and celebrate. Don't feel guilty to say, yes, it's good to be thriving. And then a lot of us, I feel like we're in the middle. And there was a piece by Adam Grant in the New York Times that really went viral. Everyone was talking about this idea that there's neither here nor there, and there's languishing, which is really in the middle. And I want you to think about the kids that you have in your life. Where are they on this spectrum, right? Are they struggling right now? Are they really thriving right now? Are they languishing in the middle? And just to kind of flesh that out a little bit more, struggling, we're really going to see these externalizing behaviors that they're really, seeking help with. So anxiety, depression, ADHD, where they're having a loss of daily functions. They're not sleeping, not eating, not completing school or other requirements, not connecting with people, friends and family. Could look like some self-harm, eating disorders. I'm hearing a lot about substance use. And food can be a substance. Screens can also be a substance. They can be something that you can have a healthy relationship or an unhealthy relationship with. So and then the other components of struggling that I just want to call out, because we're all learning our literacy of what trauma looks like and post-traumatic stress looks like. So burnout, a little bit different from depression because it has to do with just the exhaustion of every day and losing all kind of interest in things that you were able to do before. And really the amount that you're able to do in a day just is crashing. Moral injury is a kind of a new concept. It was first introduced with soldiers on the battlefield, and they found that we are really we're ethical creatures. We have a moral ethical compass. And when we're asked to do things that we see are wrong or that we're contributing to the harm of other people, then there is a feeling that makes trauma even worse. And the way that I see moral injury translating into the pandemic is that we know that our decisions are affecting other people, and we don't always know if we're doing the right thing by other people. And so, if you had to take a kid into school when it didn't feel safe to you, or do something else that didn't feel safe, or maybe there was shaming going on. There's a lot of social shaming going on. So there's something that compounds your feelings of not feeling like you're doing the right thing. And that makes it so much harder to recover. And then stuckness. So like, a mental loop where you're returning to the same thoughts over and over again, or just Groundhog Day, every day feels the same. And then languishing is going to be on the milder end, right? A milder loss of motivation. You can still get done when you need to get done, but it just doesn't seem worth it anymore. You're having that ice cream, but you're not really enjoying it. Your energy is low even after you sleep. You're sleeping okay, but then your energy is not so great. And oh, you walk into the room and it's like, what was I in this room? What was I here for? I totally forget. So not being able to really make plans or look forward to things, this is all aspects of languishing. And, when thinking about this for our kids, I think what's really helpful to realize, because I'm finding, and maybe this is social media, and maybe it's the fact that we've all been online and not talking face to face, but, it's so hard not to make comparisons. And sometimes we feel like we're in a really competitive environment. And, one person will, you might have a kid who's struggling and a kid who's thriving, or a kid who's struggling and a kid who's languishing. Siblings might be different, friend groups might be different. And so if somebody says something about, oh, all the kids are struggling, and you're like, well, that's not true of my kid, then there's a defensiveness that comes in. So I think what's really helpful to understand or realize, this is a framework that I got from my screen time work, when thinking about, okay, screens are ubiquitous, they're obviously very powerful. But kids are mostly okay. So how do we square that circle? And the way that we think about that is, there are some kids who are like orchids. So they're very delicate. They need careful handling. They're susceptible to problems and issues that come through. And if they are already struggling, the chances are that with a challenge, they're going to struggle more. And then a lot of our kids are thankfully like dandelions, maybe even most of them are pretty resilient by nature. They are growing by nature, they're finding their way, and they're mostly going to be fine out of this. And I think it's probably safe to assume that if you don't see major pain points, it doesn't mean that that they're not, there might not, there always can be things that you're missing or things that they're hiding, but not proceeding from the assumption that our kids are all super damaged by this, I think is a good way to go. So, let's talk about the difference between what we mean by resilience and what we actually mean by post traumatic growth, because where your kids are now is going to have some factor of where they're going to go in the future. So talking about what helps kids, obviously rest and breaks, obviously a little bit of self-care, and that can mean lots of different things for kids. And I was just telling a story about a friend of mine who, her son and his friends got vaccinated and they were able to host a party. So he's 18, he's graduating high school, and they had a party at their house, and just, the kids yelling and the music and the dancing, and nobody could believe that they were back in this way. So I think that's kind of a hopeful sign. Controlled exposure means like sometimes we're done talking about the pandemic and we're done talking about everything that we've gone through. And that's totally fine. It's totally fine to limit that diet of news. And I think we're all happy to be in a time when there isn't such an avalanche of news that we have to be so vigilant about all the time. Clear-eyed view. So a clear-eyed view is an important component of resilience. And what that means is, we're not going to bury things with toxic positivity. We're not going to try to put this behind us and act like nothing happened. Or, we acknowledge, yeah, validate, yeah, like it's too bad that you lost out on this time, and that your year wasn't the way you wanted it to be. Good to kind of be realistic about that. Helpful for recovery. And then another component research shows of resilience is being able to try something new. So really kind of like going out and doing something that's totally different, that has nothing to do with what you've been doing before, can really be a sign of resilience. The way that post traumatic growth works is a little bit different. So, post traumatic growth, first of all, you have to experience a trauma to experience post traumatic growth. So, for our kids that kind of were sailing along in the pandemic, um, getting back to better than normal is not a realistic expectation for them. They're going to continue on trajectory, and that's great. For the kids that really struggled, or for the adults, for you or your family members that really struggled, this is where the traumatic growth becomes a possibility, and it becomes a possibility through really hard work. So this is just starting to be identified. The science of it is really just emerging, but some of the components of post-traumatic growth are, first of all, relating to others, so strengthening relationships, seeing new possibilities in your life, experiencing your own personal strength, gaining a spiritual perspective, or a broader dimensional view of your life, and generally gratitude and appreciation of life. And these are components of, so for example, one body of research tracked a group of young mothers before Hurricane Katrina. and followed them all the way through the hurricane and after the hurricane and even up to the present day. And it was a fraction of them who actually could say, yes, my life is better than it was before this happened to me. And so I think that's a really kind of profound statement and accomplishment. And I saw it in the statements of this young woman that I interviewed, who I'll call E. And she had been kind of an A and B student before the pandemic. And she had really struggled even going to school, had tried different medications, tried therapy, and pulled her grades back up to a C. And so by the end of 10th grade, she was able to say, I'm average. I'm a C. I'm average. And she said, I think I would have been disappointed in myself, but actually now I'm proud of myself. And her mother was proud of her too. And I thought that that was such a sweet moment to see that, um, it wasn't just a normal year in her life, high school, it was actually a year of growth. And it was a year where she was able to struggle, seek help, and realize that people were able to help her and support her, and that she herself was able to recover. And so it's just so much bigger than a grade in class. And so this is an inventory, a post-traumatic growth inventory, and there's different items in it. You can think about how they relate to your life, how much you might be able to say these things in relationship to your experiences since the pandemic. So, I changed my priorities. I figured out what's really important to me. I relate to that one, I think. I have a greater appreciation for the value of life. Maybe you picked up new hobbies. We hear about that a lot, new interests, new hobbies. I most clearly see who I can count on in times of trouble. Did you kind of go through your friends and there were people that really showed up for you and you showed up for them? That's something I can happily also say. Are you feeling closer to anyone? Did you experience the gratitude for the closeness that you had maybe with your own family members? Were you able to handle difficulties, and are you proud of yourself the way that E was? I can accept things. I can appreciate every day. I'm stronger than I thought I was, or conversely, at the same time, I better accept the fact that I need other people. So again, I mean, I don't want to get into toxic positivity and saying that everybody's going to feel this way as a result of the pandemic, but to think about it as a possibility, I think is it's a really nice thing, because we know that we can get more. And somebody asked me in the presentation last night whether they thought that post-traumatic growth was a mindset. And I think that when you think about relating to other people, that's definitely something you can cultivate. You can choose to cultivate appreciation of life, gratitude. You can choose to appreciate your own strength in getting through this. And I got to say, like, if it's May and you are here in a personal development, parenting speech, like, you really do have it together in a certain way that I think it's pretty awesome. So how do we foster this kind of growth or resilience in our kids, whether they're struggling, whether they're languishing, or even if they're thriving right now? How do we foster that? We're going to do that through understanding exactly what our kids need right now. So um, they really need their stability, the sources of routine in their life. They need support. They need to be able to gain status. So this is dependent on kind of their developmental phase. They need to be able to be pushing for goals and reaching goals. And they definitely need to be playing and having a lot of fun. Their academics right now, age standards for academics are really arbitrary unless they're at a very intense cliff moment in their high school career or their school career. I don't think the next 4 months are really going to be about academics for a lot of kids. But at the same time, as we start to think about where we're going from here, I think it's also, we are maybe making decisions about the next year and what we want to do academically. Where do we want our education system to go, and what's been happening to our kids academically? What do we want to have happen? So this is my daughter doing her 4th grade remote, and she's got her banana, and it's kind of okay. It had its ups and its downs this year. School was very, very different this year. And I think we have a chance to learn from those differences, hopefully, not only as parents, but also as educators. So one thing is the rat race ground to a halt. So I had got this observation really early on from this boy Oswaldo, who was a foster kid learning in Washington State and a really good student. And he said, I notice at school, sadly, it's not much about learning. It's about getting that grade, about getting that A. And if you only have that grind and the grind stops, it's no more point. Um, I thought this was such an interesting observation because to what degree is school like a demolition derby for our kids where we're pushing them towards a finish line? And then the music kind of stopped and we all realized it was artificially constructed. And what happened to their intrinsic motivation and their curiosity? Where did that go if they weren't being forced to learn? And I think that a lot of us experience the limits of the kind of coercive structure of education. Um, and then, trying to figure out how to get kids to participate when they're on the other end of a screen was a huge conundrum for parents and for teachers, for parents who were standing in for teachers and for teachers who were trying to do it. And this is Jose Luis Wilson, who's a middle school teacher in New York City and Washington Heights, in a really hard hit neighborhood of the pandemic. And he said, in normal times, I would have a chunk of my kids that would do whatever I asked them to do. I would have a chunk that would need some poking and prodding. And then I would have a chunk that wouldn't do it no matter what. And now I can't poke and I can't prod. There's not very much I can actually do to make them do the work. And so, again, this kind of asks the question of, is school meant to be a structure that forces our kids to comply? Or is there any way that we can think of having an educational career where they have an intrinsic motivation and they're able to do it themselves and develop that executive functioning? Some of our kids experienced that this year, and some of them really came up against their limitations, and so did we, frankly. And we all discovered the limitations of remote and of Zoom. A is a kid in San Francisco, an 11-year-old who was not able to be on Zoom. It really was something that led to him not getting a really appropriate education for the year. And hopefully, conversely, just as he did, he says, he misses his friends, he misses recess. How can we rediscover those things that made school fun and made school enjoyable and engage us in the year to come? So in thinking about what we want for our kids educationally and academically in the rest of their careers, a really fun friend of mine introduced this concept of Marie Kondoing the curriculum, right? So go through and ask yourself, does this spark joy? And so in this world where 60% of colleges have gotten rid of the ACT and the SAT, there's just a different concept of merit that's happening. I think that school's not going to go back to having just one delivery model. Remote is going to be an option, having certain classes remote, having a whole school remote or a whole year, a hybrid model. I think all of these are going to very much stay in play. The idea of a fixed mindset. So, our educators pivoted on a dime and they totally changed how they do their work overnight. And a lot of things that we thought could not be done suddenly got done. And so I think that there's a new concept of what school can be, and innovations that have been put off for a long time are now in play very much. And then a lot of these other things, not bringing your whole self to school. We all learned that the only way that school could be successful in this remote pandemic world is with very strong relationships between students and teachers. And one of the positive aspects of this time, if it can be called a positive aspect, is that we saw into each other's homes. We made this connection between school and home in a way that it hadn't been made before. If school was successful, it happened because teachers forged these relationships and parents forged these relationships as well. Similarly, we can't have school without addressing the social and emotional needs of students, not only because we have so many students that are struggling and languishing, but because it's just not fair and it's not right. I've changed the way that I give presentations now because I really feel like we have to address people as the emotional beings and creatures that we are, because even though we're separated by this computer screen, we have this commonality and this common experience. And I just don't think it behooves us anymore to try to ignore that. I don't think we're going to have successful schools if they don't allow students to be their whole selves, to be listened to feel respected. And of course, a lot of that relates to the power structures that are in our society, whether that means Asian American students or students with special education designations, students who are LGBTQ, students who are Black, that they are feeling heard, feeling respected, and feeling part of the community. And I think, it's no accident if we look back on the arc of this year that George Floyd happened, that these protests happened. And a lot of the teenagers that I know, that was a defining experience of their year, even more than the pandemic, because they suddenly felt like they were part of a larger movement that was trying to move society forward. Um, and then thinking about the things that really worked for this year and also about the developmental needs of our kids. So let's talk about this for a second. So when you start to get into kind of the 13 to 18-year-old age range, is a higher and higher need for obviously peer approval, peer relationships, caring adult relationships outside of the parents. And this is a big part where a lot of our kids have struggled this year without those caring adults, the coaches and the youth leaders that they might not have been able to see. They also have a deep developmental need for status and meaning and accomplishment and achievement. So, our kids do need high expectations. They do need rigor. They need to feel proud of themselves with goals that ideally they're involved in setting. And so, school can be a really big part of that. It's not just about lifting all of the expectations and lifting all the requirements. It's about, what do you really want out of this experience? How can we get you invested in this? And what do you really care about? And the good thing about that is that we have a really large body of evidence that shows that kids who get deep and rich and emotionally grounded experiences in their education end up being more successful in their lives. So Gallup and Purdue a couple of years ago did the largest survey of college graduates in history. They surveyed about 25 to 30,000 college graduates, and they did it on their index. And they have an index of engagement and thriving. And they have asked people about how they're engaged and how they're thriving in different spheres of their lives, like emotional, financial, work related, and health related. So different spheres of their lives. And they've done that group of questions to like millions of people. And they've shown that, for example, if you have a more engaged employees, then a company will do better in the Fortune 500. It'll do better in the stock market. So there's hard evidence correlations between the answers on these polls and kind of real world indicators. So with this survey, they focused on college graduates. And they said, okay, these are the characteristics of your college experience, and this is how you rate your life 5 years later, 10 years later, 25 years later. And what they found was going to, an Ivy League college, a private college, the top 100 colleges in the US News and World Report rankings, none of that had any correlation, with thriving or with engagement in your life. And what did were what seems like these potentially quite soft things. So graduates who said they felt, quote, emotionally supported during college had more than twice the odds of being engaged in their work and more than 3 times as likely to be thriving in their lives. What does it mean to be emotionally supported? It means something kind of specific. I had at least one professor who made me excited about learning. I had professors that cared about me as a person, or I had a mentor who encouraged my hopes and dreams. These are the things that are emotionally supportive that made people engage in thriving. Similarly, experiential and deep learning. So it's not only about relationships. If you have experiential and deep learning opportunities in college, you had twice the odds of being engaged in your future career. So at least one long-term project that's at least a semester long, an internship that got you into the workplace while you were in school, and or being intensely engaged in a extracurricular like arts or sports. So these are the kinds of experiences that we want our kids to be able to seek out and cultivate. And now that we're getting back into, potentially next year, a new school year, a different school experience, these are what we're kind of seeking out. And it's really possibly a different definition of what we mean by academic excellence, and certainly not achievement for its own sake, and certainly not grades for their own sake. So what I want to present to you as a question and kind of come full circle with this is, wouldn't it be interesting if this group of students discovered, and with the help of supportive families and supportive educators, that the skills that they needed to thrive in the new world, in the new millennium, came out of our shared quest for resilience and post-traumatic growth from this disaster? And, I have a little bit of a personal experience with this in my own life because my hometown is New Orleans, Louisiana, and I was a young adult when Katrina came and turned my parents out of their house. And I was able to kind of come in as a reporter and witness the recovery from the city, from the hurricane. And what happened with that hurricane, clear-eyed view, it caused damage. Okay, it caused damage, social damage, economic damage, incredible physical damage, real hurt, real trauma. And people discovered a sense of meaning. So people flooded into that city who were prepared to love that city and to build up its culture and to rededicate itself. And today, the mayor of that city is a neighborhood activist who came up during Katrina and discovered her voice during Katrina. And the city was hit super hard again by the pandemic, but also has an incredibly strong response to the pandemic and really stands out in the South as far as its achievements with inoculations and vaccinations. And so the cohesiveness of the city and the resurgence and the love that people show for the culture of the city really show that, I think, post-traumatic growth on a community-wide level. So, I want to present that as an idea, as an opportunity in our minds for how we get out of here. But again, people are going to be in really different places. And that's important to be aware of and compassionate about and just really tender about. I think, you rush out and you're like, oh, I'm so inspired by this thing. And then you see someone and they just can't even hold it together to listen to you because they're languishing or they might really be struggling. Losses are still happening. Grief is still happening. People piles on. And so I think it's important to realize that growth is an opportunity, but it's always going to be different for different people. And the metaphor that helps me in thinking about that is I think about different kinds of trees, right? So I don't know about you, but I've been taking a lot of walks outside during the pandemic. And I live very close to a park. And of course, in the city, the trees are all really different and they all grow really differently. And some of them get trimmed down. Some of them are crunched down by scaffolding, or they are having to grow out sideways and they're being trimmed. But Ram Dass says, you can kind of practice and say, we don't judge trees based on what they've been through, right? You barely ever go through and you're like, wow, that's a really ugly tree. Every tree is different and every tree has its own trajectory. And we just kind of appreciate them for what they are, because to us as humans, they're all just trees, right? And what would it be like if we could look at humans that way and look at them kind of kindly, lovingly, and also objectively to say, you went through a thing, you've been through something. I can tell that it shows in how you carry yourself. And that's great. And that's okay. Maybe you haven't had time to grow back from it or bounce back, or maybe you never will because you're going to grow a certain way. And I'm okay with that. And you're okay with that. So, you might be this tree that's really weathered by this pandemic, and you might always have something of it in you. And that's going to be beautiful in its own way, because the trees that grow up on the cliffside are just very beautiful and they're very strong, right? They have to be very strong to get through that. Or you might be a tree that really gets on in like a splendid isolation, and you're able to really become the fullest expression of yourself. Or you might be a tree that is just relishing being back in community and being part of a forest and being in communication with all the other trees and finding your place in that broader balance. And our kids are all like this too. All of our kids are going to be different, and they're all going to respond differently. And each way that they do that is worth loving. So yeah, I'm ready to get your questions, and thank you so much.
Well, Anya, thank you so much. There's so much here in terms of food for thought to reflect on this evening, in terms of the experiences that I know as educators and as parents that we see every day. And it's really wonderful to hear about your research in this area most recently. So I do want to make sure that we have some time to jump into the questions that are coming in from our audience. So perhaps we could start with this one. We know that the pandemic really showed us how we need to focus more even more so than recent years on mental health issues. And in your research, I'm curious, how have you seen schools and communities really change or add additional resources for mental health counseling this past year? And even thinking ahead, if we have to do this again, not necessarily a far-fetched idea, maybe heading into next winter, how can parents and schools and our school counselors really be better prepared?
Yeah, these are all great questions. So I think what I'm seeing emerge. First of all, we've got funding to hire counselors. So that's important for our public schools, right? That's something that's called out specifically by Biden's, federal funding for schools. And I think what's important, that's interesting that we're seeing is sort of a public health approach to mental health. So what that means is we're no longer waiting for the kids that tell us that they're on fire in order to
Right.
intervene, right? So we're going to go out and we're going to kind of do the proactive scanning, and we're going to do the check-ins, and we're going to normalize talking about this. And that also means equipping every adult that makes contact with a kid, to have this vocabulary around mental health, to know what are the signs, right, of a kid who's struggling, to know where to go and where to tell them where to go.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
I've had schools where the counselors are dropping in on the Zoom classes, and they're pulling kids out into breakout rooms to have a little chat, just like they would do
Hmm.
in a hallway. And another really interesting, so I was talking to children's bereavement centers. So we have, a study came out, around 40,000 kids have lost a family member to COVID.
Hmm.
So it's a bereavement epidemic. And an amazing thing that they said was that they're having grief circles in schools, and they're teaching students how to talk to fellow students about a death, because that's
Mm.
something that they're going to go through at some point. Someone is going to lose someone. And so how do
Yeah.
you know how to have the conversation? So many of our adults don't know how to have the conversation. So
Hmm.
when you put that out into a community, it resounds so much, just to realize, how do you be there with someone? How do you ask? How do you help? How do you just have those basic tools? So I think there it could be a renaissance of kind of mental health literacy that could serve this generation really well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We do have a question coming in from Sandra in our live audience. We talk about resilience, but how can we measure it? And can we see it? How much is enough?
Yeah, these are really great questions. I mean, again, this is back to baseline. And the tricky things with that kids is that they're always changing. And a year ago is not where they are now. But it's okay to ask kids kind of like and I always ask my kids every night, we do the rose, the thorn, and the bud at dinner, right? Like, what was a good thing?
Yes.
What was a hard thing? And what are you looking forward to? And so practicing gratitude with your kids, and helping them look forward to things again. How much is enough? I think that we don't want it to feel like a pressure or an expectation. I think that we're hopefully listening more than we're talking to our kids about this, and rather than trying to measure it, maybe just saying, is today better than yesterday, and are you feeling better than you felt, a little while ago when it was really hard, and how do you know that it's better? I think these are great kind of probing questions to have with your kid, if it's on a hike or it's in a car, just like prompt that self-reflection that can all help us all heal.
Mm, absolutely. I agree. I like that you mentioned on a hike or in the car. I think especially working with teenagers, I found that having walk and talks, especially when it's focused on students' mental health, oftentimes rather than having that face-to-face interaction is a great way to get students to open up. I imagine it is for parents as well.
Yeah.
Um, another question coming in from our live audience. During COVID, some students really thrived academically, and their parents took advantage of signing them up for all different types of online classes.
Mhm.
For example, fourth and fifth grade students moving into accelerated math courses and geometry and algebra. But we know that other students really fell behind because of perhaps a lack of support at home or inequity in terms of access. So, how do you think schools can really work to reacclimate students to campus in the fall with such a wide scope of student experiences coming out of this?
Yeah, that's a huge, huge issue. I mean, I remember doing a story a few years ago where it was shown that the majority of fourth grade teachers had students in their classrooms at four different reading levels. So, like from 2 years behind to 2 years ahead. And so,
Mhm.
differentiation is really hard. It's a factor of class size, it's a factor of how flexible the school can be. I think this is where we're going to get into the importance of multiple pathways, and our expectations have just exploded. So whether that be, teachers, the parents that discovered and were able to take advantages of resources like, a beast math or an out school class or a private tutor, they're probably going to continue to want to supplement
Mhm.
academically. And schools are going to have to figure out how to respond to that and create lesson plans that engage everyone. But if I were talking to a kid, and I mean, I have a kid like this who was able to kind of really gain from working at her own pace, the talk I'm going to give to her is about empathy and about realizing that what we're trying to do when we get back into the classroom is be part of a community and to rediscover the importance of collaboration and group work and understanding that people have different learning styles and that they're coming from different places. So I would hope that, the necessity of meeting each kid where they're at is also joined by a recognition of the value of having ourselves in a classroom community again, because in the real world, right, you're going to have to be on teams. You're going to have to collaborate. It's not just about you and your achievement. It's really about, as smart as we are, we're smarter together.
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. I do want to remind our audience for a moment that they can add their questions to the chat if they're logged into their Gmail accounts. And they can also, if you'd like to submit a question to pcgtickets@gmail.com as we continue this evening. I was hoping we could pause for a moment and transition back to our educators and think, our professional development event as part of our Princeton Common Ground series yesterday was, I think, so enlightening. And I hope that you would be open to sharing that statistic in terms of your poll in just a few minutes. But in your research, have you seen a larger than normal turnover of staff this year in schools or retirements? And what are the skills that educators of the future really need?
Great questions. Great questions. So yeah, so we asked our poll of teachers yesterday, and 3 out of 4 of them said that they were languishing, which is right in line with our bell curve, right? And I was happy to be able to have a safe space to share that because I do know that teachers have had an incredibly hard year and they've been getting it from all sides. I don't think we have the numbers yet on leaving the profession. I think that we'll have a make or break when there are teachers that have had the remote exemptions and maybe have to come back to school in person. But in an economic downturn, the number of people who are able to leave their jobs is going to be limited just by necessity. So I don't know that we're necessarily going to see um, the whole career kind of hit that some people might be worried, but we'll see. And in terms of what educators need, I mean, it's always been a learning profession, but this experience of having to completely reinvent how they teach, um, the teachers that have jumped on that challenge with both feet, they're a special breed, and they're the ones who really see this as, my job is, yes, it's conveying information, yet yes, it is mastering new media and storytelling forms, and yes, it is engaging students and again, bringing my whole self. We did a series on NPR where we interviewed teachers about this year and what they've discovered about themselves. And a number of them said, it's the vulnerability, like being able to
Mm,
be vulnerable with their students. I remember talking to a teacher who, played the piano for his kids. I talked to a teacher, obviously a lot of them sharing their pets. One of them said that I teach from my bed because my kids are in their beds and they need to know that like I stay up late making their lesson plans just like they stay up late doing their homework, and that's okay. Like we're all in it together.
mm. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I think that vulnerability is has been key, and having those discussions and having that level of transparency and communication with students about that
mhm.
has really paid off for a lot of our teachers. We have a question coming in from Rob. He'd like to know, as students return to increased in-person learning, how do we really help them loosen the bond that they've built with technology,
Yeah.
which has really been their lifeline?
Yeah, I was hoping to get that question, and I actually I have a slide for it.
Thank
So
you, Rob.
yeah, thank you so much. So what I want to encourage is we're not taking all the candy and throwing it out the window, but we're adding vegetables to the plate. Okay. So we are, when we're thinking about transitioning our kids from what has been, in fact, their lifeline, I want to encourage a harm reduction approach because you have to preserve the relationship. Your leverage over your kids diminishes by the year. And you really want to think hard about what is it I'm trying to accomplish here. And ideally, it's something that you share. So it's a goal that you're going to share. So first of all, what are you trying to accomplish? If it's a, focus, usually one habit change at a time. So is it bedtime that you're trying to focus on? Or is it gaming that seems compulsive that you're trying to focus on? So what is that one thing you're trying to change? And then adding vegetables, meaning can we shift our media consumption towards things that are maybe more creative, that are in person, where they're talking to their friends at the same time? Can they shift from video to audio? My kids are into the podcasts and the audiobooks, which I find is a less harmful alternative. It's slower, it's calmer. And then the other thing, this might not seem like an obvious move, but if there's any way that you can play Among Us with them or play this game with them or watch the movie with them, because the shared viewing immediately you're getting, first of all, you're showing why you're showing a willingness to learn why they love what they love. You are learning more about what they're actually doing, which is important. You are having a conversation. Hopefully you're talking a little bit while you're consuming the media. And that's something where, again, you're kind of raising the interactivity. And these are all ways to kind of move a little bit, shift a little bit every day rather than try to like immediately stop what you're doing, what they're doing. And then, of course, balancing it out. So again, sleep is super important. It's super important for teenagers. It's important for younger kids. We're going to need to get on a different schedule if you're going from remote back to in-person. Ideally, summer is the time to make sure they get outside every day, that they do have that screen-free moment. Whether it's just like, oops, I rented a cabin, Airbnb, and there's no Wi-Fi. Oh, too bad. Or whatever it is, you can get them out of range for a little while. And all of us can kind of appreciate that or observe that. Can you get them to put down the screens for 5 minutes during dinner, have a little bit of conversation? And then don't forget the tactile. So this was a very good tip that was given to me by Lisa D'Amour, who's an amazing teen psychologist. And she said, our kids have suffered from the lack of physical interaction because we hug them up to a certain point and then we kind of stop carrying them around and maybe we stop snuggling them. So our older kids might need a little bit more of that tactile input. And so it really does balance out kind of the screen-based isolation. So those are my tips on that.
For all of our parents that joined us tonight, if you haven't played Among Us, I strongly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. Our freshmen definitely got me pretty hooked back in the fall. And I think, Anya, I think we have time for probably one more question. So, before we wrap up this evening, we'd really be interested to know what lessons you hope that families will really take away from this experience and how we can use this experience of pandemic parenting to propel us into really more connected relationships with our children in the long term.
This is such a great question. I love it. Clear-eyed view, once again, like you might find that this year broke you and there's no silver linings, and that's fine. Like that might be your reality. Okay. So let's just put that. I don't want to make anyone feel like they have to gain some nice thing out of some rainbow out of this. Okay. If you're willing to take the optimistic view, if you have that in you, and if you're stuck with us this hour, maybe you do, and I hope you do. For me, what did it mean to really slow down, to actually watch our kids on a day-to-day basis as they grew and they struggled, and to be there for them and to be that entity? So few of us ever get that opportunity, maybe for a week out of the year, or to feel like it's just the family. And getting to know our kids as human beings and as people, watching the responsibilities they were able to take on, and watching them roll with the punches of this year, and letting them see us in our vulnerable states, seeing us struggle and be stressed out with work, or seeing us not handle an interaction that well, and then going back and repairing and apologizing. I had a big apology moment with my 4-year-old this morning. I wasn't that great. I wasn't my best self with her, and then I just really had to ask for a hug, and I had to say I was sorry. And so again, kind of similar with teachers, right? It's like the more that we were able to be vulnerable and to have that repair when we weren't our best, and to appreciate that our kids are people, and that maybe we won't be cocooned with them again this way, but we'll always carry that forward, that experience of being so close.
Mm. I think that's a great point on which to wrap up our evening. And, really thank you, Anya, for your time and the wisdom that you shared with us and your guidance this evening. And I would also like to thank all of our attendees this evening. You are truly what makes the Princeton Common Ground work so beautifully. And before you log off this evening, please fill out our survey, which has been added to the chat and will also be sent immediately at the conclusion of our program this evening. We really take your input into account when shaping upcoming programming. And with that, I would like to say, have a wonderful evening, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you at the next Princeton Common Ground lecture. Take care.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moyo. This is fun.
Thank you.
Tuning into tonight's program. My name is Vandana Banot, and I have the honor of co-chairing Princeton Common Ground alongside Elisa Liang. It's been quite a year for all of us, and we are so very thankful to all of you, our audience members, for your consistent support and participation with our programming. A big thank you goes to Anya Kamenetz, our speaker, for her truly insightful analysis and empathetic approach on where to go from here as we navigate post-pandemic parenting. We hope her message has resonated and sparked dialogue. As we stand on this beautiful campus, we are especially thankful to Stuart Country Day School for hosting our spring program. Thank you, Dr. Patty Fagan, and your incredibly talented and thoughtful leadership team for your partnership in hosting and moderating this week's Common Ground virtual events. We also want to express our sincerest gratitude to our 16 Princeton Common Ground member schools for all their generous support and funding that make these parent and faculty education programs possible. Over to you, Elisa.
Hi everyone, my name is Elisa Liang, and together with Vandana, I'm one of the co-chairs of Princeton Common Ground. Little could we have imagined last year that this year's theme of parenting in the digital age would become so poignant as our children, our relatives, our friends, and we became isolated in our homes with our digital lives at times the only means of connection with the outside world. All of us within the PCG membership, educators, administrators, students, and families alike have struggled, hoped, feared, and fought to persevere throughout this difficult year. To be here healthy and vaccinated and able to express my gratitude is a gift. So on that note, and on behalf of Princeton Common Ground, I'd like to echo Vandana's thanks and also add our thanks to Lisa Pisano and Aurora Kalanico, our Stuart PCG reps, Claire Millington, and all of my colleagues at PCG who've been nothing less than magnificent in helping us turn lemons into lemonade this year, reinventing and improving our program at every turn. Thank you, team. As always, at the end of each program, we ask you to share your thoughts about this evening's program and to fill out the survey that you'll be receiving momentarily. It would help us so much if you would please respond while the details are still fresh in your mind. Stay safe, stay sane. We hope to see you at the next program.